What's the scariest true story you've heard or told? One I've seen. Shitty teenagers threw a rock into traffic. Smashes the windshield of a nice car. Driver loses control and kills a pedestrian while skidding on ice. I met a guy who had been traveling Australia with a couple friends. Hitchhiking around as many of us had done. One of his friends told him they were near his distant uncle's house, whom he'd never met before. He got a phone number from a family member, and as they had hoped, the uncle offered them a place to stay. He picked them up in town and drove them out to his rural property way out in the bush. They said he seemed like a pretty normal guy, friendly and cheery. When it was time to set up a place to sleep, the uncle took them to a closet that was totally full of sleeping bags and bedrolls. They didn't think much of it at the time and all grabbed a kid and set up on the living room floor. They stayed a couple days and nothing out of the ordinary happened. And afterwards the uncle drove them to the bus station and they continued on their way. About a year later, that man was arrested and charged with several counts of murder. He was the man who was picking up young hitchhiking backpackers and slaughtering them. The guy who told me this story was 100% certain he had slept in the sleeping bag of one of his victims. One of my friends was drugged by a nice seeming girl at a bar that tried to sex traffic her. The girl got her an Uber to an address she didn't know under the guise of get my drunk friend home, but she woke up on the way and told the driver she didn't know where they were going. They called the cops. Apparently that wasn't the first time that week they'd heard the same story and they recognized the address as one they were already tracking. If she hadn't woken up on the way she might have been trafficked by now. Apparently they use younger, safe seeming girls to do the collecting a lot of the time. My baby's crib caught fire in the middle of the night. Some people's literal worst nightmare. Oh my god. How? Was the baby in it at the time? Yes. He was severely burnt and spent a month intubated and in a medically induced coma. He is 5 now and is okay though. My mom's best friend was murdered by a man because she broke up with him. I'm not sure I remember all the details correctly, but anyway, a guy was cleaning a giant cooking tank at a tuna factory. It was so big that he had to climb all the way in. Someone else didn't check and protocol was broken along the way somewhere. Second guy locked the barrel and turned it on, cooking the guy inside alive. Most of what happened to those who died at Chernobyl qualify, but that's a familiar one. A more obscure source of horror is that the drugs that stop you from moving during surgery and the ones that stop you from feeling pain are often separate chemicals. There have been cases where the sedatives wore off during surgery, but the chemicals paralyzing the body were still active. So they were fully conscious while being operated on, but unable to move or show that they were in pain. Sweet dreams. I was 19 at the time and new-ish to the bigger city. I was on a late jog one night. I notice a car do a U-turn and start to follow me. I'm chased for a few blocks. I ran to a house with lights on and was pounding on the door saying I'm being followed and chased, but the people would not open the door or let me in. The car was just waiting there for me to leave. I asked for a phone and they refused. I was crying and sobbing thinking this is it. I'm going to be raped and murdered and no one is going to find me. Absolutely true story my mom told me. This was around the time Paranormal Activity came out and I watched it and almost died thinking about this story. When I was in high school my mom told me about a friend of hers. The friends and my mom got together for lunch. This was 1988. Friend was telling them about how horrified she was as her husband was going to be released that year from prison. She wasn't sure what to do. She'd never sought a divorce while he was in prison. 10 years earlier family and moved to a nice suburb. House was perfect, nice cul-de-sac. But right off the bat shit went weird. Their 2 daughters shared a room and would wake mom up in middle of the night with night terrors and mom would go in and the child had peed on the wood floor. Problem was these pee puddles were massive. Like no way he child could have peed that much. Hubby started acting weird too. Becoming absent. Always wanting to stay in his office. Eventually they started sleeping separately. One night just a few months after moving and wife was sleeping on couch and woke up to her husband in the corner talking to something. What she remembers him saying was I know I have to kill her, and he proceeded to turn around from whoever he was talking to and rushed up on her and stabbed her over 40 times with a kitchen knife. Her screams woke up the children who came down and wife screamed for them to get the neighbor who happened to be a preacher. Preacher comes over with a Bible, said drop the knife in God's name, and hubby passes out cold. Wife was in the hospital for 2 months and hubby got 10 years. When she came to collect her stuff from the house as she was selling it, a neighbor came by. They apologized profusely as they felt guilty for not saying anything, as the owners before them had complained of weird stuff too and didn't live there but a year. My mother told me the story about how her grandma sadly passed away now. I miss her dearly. Had a fight with her sister when she was younger. She locked her sister in the kitchen in pitch dark and told her that something with green eyes would get her. When her mother found, she got mad and told her off, and then made her walk out of the front door and go all the way around the back to get back in. However, to get into the back garden she had to walk through a small alleyway, and she said that she vividly remembers seeing a man that looked exactly like the devil, wearing a cloak and such. The scariest part is that she mentioned how he had green eyes. She screamed and ran inside. My mother told me about how she was so serious about this and that this was a true story. My mother never taught me to swim because when she was a teenager she saw a friend get sucked into a whirlpool at the bottom of a drainage lake. That is the deepest body of water within a few hundred miles of us. They didn't find his body for days. One of my dad's friend's wife was murdered by some crazy dude walking down the street. This guy had just been released from a mental hospital and literally just stabbed her as she walked home. When my dad's friend came back, he thought she had just taken the dogs out for a walk. So he walked along the normal walk route and he saw loads of blue lights. He was stopped by a police officer and wasn't allowed any closer until he saw that it was his wife. A man got shot by a neighbor after an argument where he was accused to be COVID positive, and he's still going out to spread it, then staying home to quarantine himself. They got into a heated argument and the victim attempted to get closer to the suspect, taunting him, saying they should get positive together, forcing the suspect to take action and to shoot the victim before he gets too close. Perpetuator fled and is still in hiding. Saw a Diedrich armored man in the door of my bedroom when I was 5. I still remember it like it was yesterday. There have been several confirmed cases in a few different countries of people living in other people's houses unbeknownst to them. I believe one case went on for a couple of years. The intruder would wait until the owner would go to work and then sneak out and steal small amounts of food as not to be noticed. Well, eventually the owner did notice and couldn't figure out where his food was going. So he set up a hidden camera to record it. I can only imagine how scary it would have been to come home from work one night and sit down to watch the video, skipping through hours of stillness, to suddenly come across a person crawling out of your attic, and then the slow realization that that person is still in your house at that moment, and then the retroactive fear of thinking back to all the times you laid awake at night and heard a noise, which you just dismissed as coming from the pipes or the old wooden beams, but actually it was a ducking person just above you. It gives me the heebie-jeebies every time I think about it. Co-worker's dad was babysitting his baby boy for him. At one point, Granddad went into the nursery to check on the baby and found that he'd somehow reached for the window blind strap and tangled himself up in it to the point where he was choking. Baby was already blue and all of the veins in his face had popped. Grandpa called 911 and frantically dialed 911. IMS was there in 2 to 3 minutes and they brought the little fellow back to life and he's okay now. This one was told to me. A woman in Colorado worked at a corporation and there was a guy who started hanging around in the parking lot because it was a large corporation. I'm guessing that the parking lot was large. Anyway, he started stalking her and I don't know how much time had passed, but he kidnapped her and took her up to a cabin in the mountains. He didn't murder her right away, but she was held against her will for several days. He tortured her before he killed her. This happened, I'm guessing, sometime in the late 1970s, possibly mid 1980s. The person who told me this story didn't know the woman well, but worked in the same building as she. The man was caught, and since the person who told me this story didn't follow the case when it went to court, I don't know the outcome. I used to know this guy, Brandon, who had a really ducked up story. His dad was abusive, and his mom decided to leave him. She went to get her stuff, and was accompanied by her best friend and a police officer. When they got inside, His dad shot the cop, her best friend, and his mom, then killed himself. I always felt bad for him, but he ended up being pretty messed up towards women. He consistently went for underage girls and had several parents threaten to have him arrested or even kill him if he came near their daughters again. But he just couldn't seem to date someone over 18, no matter how much trouble he got in. My mom and uncles were all close with Dennis Rader, BTK serial killer, growing up. Mom because of church shit with him. His wife and daughters. Uncles because he was their scout leader. A couple days after he was caught, my uncle, who spent the most time in scouts, got very drunk and was talking about which knives were his, Rader's, favorites and the reason he'd given the kids. I was robbed at gunpoint in front of my house. He had the gun pressed into the back of my head. He took my money and jewelry and took off. He was arrested an hour later. Please subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed this video and if you want to see more of Reddit Universe.